Well, hello everybody and welcome to this morning's event with Good Grief Festival. My name is Amber Jeffrey and I am the creator and the founder of the Grief Gang podcast, which is a podcast and community that was built 3 years after the death of my mum when I just needed to find people who got it. Today I am joined by the wonderful, amazing, incredible lady who I'm so... Julia Samuel, MBE, leading psychotherapist and best-selling author, don't you know? Today we are talking about something that I think we can all relate to, and that is grief and memory. We don't live without our memory. And so to touchstone on to give a real flavour of what today's talk between Julia and I is going to do, I'm just going to read an extract from the Good Grief Festival website for this event that really will give a taster. So, memory plays a powerful role in grief. When someone we love dies, our memories of them can bring both comfort and deep pain as we adjust to a new reality of life without that person. And yet, our memories are also the place where our lost loved ones reside, and we often experience profound fear that those memories will fade or be lost altogether. Memory is an omnipresent, bittersweet companion to grief. Whoever wrote that, absolutely brilliant. Wow. Was that you, Julia?
No.
So we would really, really love for you today to get involved in the comments. We want to participate with you and to hear your stories, hear your memories as we're talking. If anything is coming up for you, to really, really share in the comment section and drop us a question at the end, because we have about 15 minutes at the end of the event to chat and to get to know one another, and hopefully Julia can answer some questions, and as can I. So we're going to get right into it. So Julia, how are you this morning? Lovely.
Good. Lovely to be back with the Good Grief Festival. Hello, everyone. So nice to be joined by you. This is such an amazing community that I feel incredibly attached to and proud to be a part of, and lovely to see you, Amber. We met through the Good Grief Festival, so there's so many connections that are made through this amazing organization.
There is, and there's so much more than just our lovely faces this morning. There's a smorgasbord of events happening across today. So if you've got a bit of a relaxing Saturday today, you can kick back and get involved with the Good Grief Festival. So Julia, to get started on talking about memories, I mean, there's so much to talk about. Obviously, it is our brain. Memories at the beginning, when I was reflecting on this event and then this topic, got thinking, memories at the beginning of death can be quite difficult, and more times than most, again, this is very much categorizing and using my own experience, the more troubling and more difficult memories come to mind, because it is obviously a bit closer to of the death, whether you deem it as a traumatic death or not. Potentially you're more closer to that fresh wound of what's happened. And obviously we hope that with time these memories get a bit softer and get a bit easier, but that's not the case for all. Not with time, the whole platitude of time is a healer that some people love and hate at the same time. Over time these memories might not lift and they might not get softer, and might be bombarded with those really tricky ones. I remember having quite a lot of troubling memories for me was seeing my mum in the hospital bed. I would really try to tap into a really the lovely memories of my mum before death and a sense of family life, but like a flashcard, it would be like, whoop, mum in bed, mum in the hospital bed, and that was like, oh, okay, we're doing that today, all right. And just so what can we do when we're struggling with those traumatic and troubling memories that come to the forefront most?
I mean, in some ways I'm going to take you a step back. And our brain is mechanically made to keep us safe. And what our brain likes functionally is predictability. And so through the bond of parent and child, or the partner that we have, or sibling, we have deep memories that is our implicit memory that, if we believed every day the person we love would die, we would kind of go mad. So we have this bond in the implicit memory, which is a deep bonding memory, that the person is alive. And then we have the explicit, like in the moment memory. And the task of grieving when you're thinking about your mum in the hospital is integrating the new explicit, the new episodic memory, she's died, and integrating it. And the process of grieving is the adaptation of recognizing that your mum has died. And it's too overwhelming to do it once. So the purpose of the memory is to update your brain, if you like. And that is a process over time. It doesn't happen, you know, in a moment. And so the idea that, you know, the grieving process is over time, but the pain of it is in the moment. So I think one of the ways of thinking about grief is that those moments of pain, or days or hours of pain, the work of mourning, is what allows us to adjust to this new reality that the person that we love has died. So that's the function of it. But the idea that you can have a troubling memory or traumatic memory is very different, because that's in a different part of the brain, which is the amygdala. And that then you get a feedback loop of having a startle reflex. And so you want to block that traumatic memory, and you use, that's triggered by sight, sound, touch, and smell, by our senses. And then you can get a negative cycle. And trauma and, say, addiction is very highly linked. So you'll do anything to anesthetize the intensity, because it's fear. And we have a fear of fear, as well as that awful surge of fear and fury in our bodies. And so traumatic memories are not naturally adaptive. So that they can naturally adapt over 6 or 7 weeks. Or 2 months, you know, these time frames are very elastic. But if you find you constantly have these traumatic memories, then you need to have proper professional support so that you take the distress out of the memory. And then the task and the work of mourning is integrating this new memory as the person that you are. And that this is the story, and with the meaning that makes sense for you of, I am Amber, I love my mum, and my mum has died. And then the next piece, I guess, is what we're going to go and talk about is next. I think before we go on to the kind of continuing relationship after the person has died, is to say that unfinished business is different to traumatic memories, in that it's like a piece of the puzzle is missing that you can obsess about and want to go back. So if you had a fight the morning your mum had died, or you had a difficult relationship, or you'd had something difficult had happened, and so that unfinished business can be so haunting, that memory can overwhelm all the other memories, and in some cases block the natural adaptation process, because all of your attention, your psychological self, your brain just keeps going back to that, oh, why didn't I, what if only. And so that can then lead to complex grief. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And you have now just triggered something for me to remembering of how I really, really fixated on probably the 6 months before my mum died, and really trying to think, did I see any signs for this? Could I have seen any signs? And remembering that she had a chesty cough like in the February of that year, and ruminating over that of, if I pushed her to go to the doctors and have an ECG, what doctor would have gone with a chesty cough and said, no, you don't need an ECG, love, you've just got a cold? But ruminating over that, and it blocked. And then when I kind of parked that and went, I have to put this down now, then when I went to just really try to tap into some other core lovely memories, my brain was a bit, no, we're still kind of over here now. And I'm like, no, I'm not.
Because in that thing of predictability and our evolutionary biology of to survive, we want others to survive. And it can give us, in some ways, a false memory, but also this kind of magical thinking of that we can save and have agency and kind of have control over aspects of life that we don't have control over, because to survive you constantly want to have that control.
Yeah, so true. Wow, that really brought that up for me. And that was the memory that came back for me. Fantastic. Yeah, we touched on continuing bonds, and I think yes is a perfect part to go on to. And I just love the sentence continuing bonds. I love any moment I get, I'm like, that's a continuing a bond. You should continue the bond. Woo! But so for people who maybe don't know what that is, it's, you know, people can often feel after that their loved one has died, that means their relationship has died, isn't it? And that doesn't necessarily mean that's true. And I think it kind of depends what side you may sit on or feel towards about either wanting to continue a bond with a person. Somebody might not even want to. They might be and you know, quite relieved that maybe that this kind of chapter has ended in their life. But for people that do really want to continue that relationship and still recognize that they have that relationship with their person, how can an individual continue a bond? We spoke about like touchstones to memory, you know, kind of you spoke about sense, smell, everything. Can you share a little bit more about kind of touchstones to memory and how people can continue a bond?
So I'll go first of all to the kind of history of continuing bonds and the model of grief through people like Kubler-Ross and even William Worden, and certainly my parents' generation, was very much, it was forget and move on, that the grieving process is that you allow yourself to feel the pain, you detach, you put it down, and you move forward with your life. And these three psychologists, Klaas, Silverman, and Nickman, kind of recognize, like we all do, that as human beings, that isn't how we operate, that people were often preoccupied talking to the person, going to the grave, asking them, should I marry George? You know, so that they died. And people thought, because there was this idea of, you know, stop, it's over, that they were mad and they had something wrong with them. And actually they created this, or extended really our understanding of grief. And grief, by the way, is both very personal, so that this may not fit for anybody, like you said, and there are universal norms, which is what we're talking about. And so they suggested this new paradigm, which is that a healthy grief doesn't resolve or detach from the person, but rather creates a relationship. And the love for that person, the thing I kind of say is the love for the person never dies. So the task of mourning is to update your explicit, so it fits your implicit memories, so that you actually know. And that's where people sometimes with time get it wrong. So if you don't do the work of grief, you know, that person can still be alive in your mind 10 years later. So time, if you do the work, works for you. But the love never dies. And so having touchstones to memory changes and evolves and develops the relationship with that person. And there are many ways, and you can, as you say, we can do it through our senses. So smell is a 10 times faster sense than any other. So making a dish that you remember particular with that person will bring back the memory of them kind of faster than you have time to think. Yeah. Or their perfume, wearing something that still smells of them. People, over time, smelling it of the person in clothes loses, and people kind of get like a dog sniffing, wanting, wearing their watch.
Like 20 years, and it's still, they're like, no one touch it, no one put anything near it.
Exactly. Don't wash, you know, a hospital sometimes wash clothes and give them back clean, and people are really upset. But also, you know, like pilgrimages, doing walks that you did with that person brings back the memory of them, and you can do it with someone else, but you can feel them with you. So, I mean, I spoke to a client last night, and his mum died, and there's a bench he goes to where she never was, but he has made that his bench with his mum, where he looks over at this lake and he feels closer to her. It's in a completely different country than anywhere else in his life. And so that when he feels really, he has this emptiness that he wakes up with, you know, he's a young man. And so he goes to the bench and he breathes and he kind of creates space And I think one of the kind of difficulties with memory and adapting and allowing grief to change us is that we want to block the pain. And of course, at times we need to block the pain. But one of the things we do to block the pain is busyness, like getting very busy, getting on, filling our diaries. And it is a kind of anesthetic, but then that does also block this space to create the expansion to develop and grow this new relationship with the person that's died, that you can begin to trust in, and that your body begins to trust in, and that you have this now integrated sense of them that is in your implicit memory, that they're in me. I can feel my mum, I can feel my husband. And so that then becomes predictable.
Yeah.
And I can develop these habits, that I play, you can have a playlist, that you can read a poem, you can light a candle, that, I often, it's a Jewish thing, but having stones, put them in your pocket, and that they're their stone.
Yeah.
Or shell, or photograph with flowers. So you create your own ritual that is the pathway to that person, that then becomes part of how you remember them, and creating new memories with them. So if something very significant happens, your mum has died and your daughter is getting married and you want to tell her, or she's having a baby, you kind of go to the picture or go to the lake like this boy does, or the bench.
I think it was really important there that you said about that young man kind of creating his own ritual, and I think that could really speak to what immediately was coming to me there, was thinking about people who had lost a loved one, who maybe they may not lived in the same country as one another yet, and were quite far apart, and especially during the time of the pandemic, during COVID, when people weren't able to go to those places or spend time with people who did feel like they were continuing that bond with their person. Sometimes you have to deal with the best hand you've got. And what can you do? You can go to the lovely lake and remember and continue your bond with your mum there. That was really sweet.
But so creating that, but also remember that in your hippocampus, which is where you kind of store, is the big library of memories.
This is like a science lessons for me.
Sorry.
No,
we have a particular part of our brain for place.
Okay.
So, which again is for evolutionary reasons. So people, I did an event a few weeks ago, and someone said to me, I find it really difficult to go and see my dad with the children, because my mum was there, and it kind of gives me almost a panic attack when I walk into the kitchen, because that place, the kitchen, the smell brings mum so back at like a million miles an hour, and I kind of feel shattered by it. Yeah. And if you kind of recognize that, so you can create a place, so you can do that by embodying it and imbuing it with your behaviors that make it the place, but also place is very powerful in memory. Mm-hmm. And if you combine place with smell, like often it's kitchens and cooking, then that is really going back in time. It's like it's a time machine. So you go back and you remember all the Christmases, the birthdays. And that for some people is a really lovely way of using and harnessing the memory to bring them close. Mm. And for other people, it can feel very overwhelming and too much. But also, some days you're going to think it's going to be fine, and because we're human beings and we're not machines, it really isn't, or the other way around. So nothing is.
You never know. That's a real part of when I find that with memory and music with me. Like for me to tap into my memory, it's definitely music for my mum. And there's some days I'll put on the song where I've been dancing around my kitchen, like woo to it. Like I love this song.
Love you, mum.
Love you, mum.
Dance with me.
Out, woo! And then some days I'm on the floor, a heap of mess. You just don't know. You just don't know. And thank you for that, Julia. That was a really great part there. To touch on now this part that I think many people will resonate. It's brain fog. And is there a proper term for that, actually, rather than just brain fog?
I mean, I think it's grief, really.
Yeah. AKA just grief. But sometimes, even after all what we've just discussed there, even with all of our might, sometimes we're actually not able to tap into those memories. Sometimes it is just blank. And I definitely had that. I would reflect maybe those first 2 years after my mum died and pre-death. it was just blank, and it was really troubling. And I remember very distinctively being out on a dog walk with my partner, and for some reason something had triggered. One of my senses must have been triggered, and this random memory came back from when I was about 15 years old. And I remember I stopped dead in my tracks. I said to my partner, give me your phone, I need to write it somewhere. I remember implicitly knowing I needed to get it down somewhere. But that took a lot of time to get there. For a long time, it was just blackout. And it can be really distressing if you're trying to really salvage those good memories. All you want is to have at least one pocket good memory to have on a rainy day. So Julia, what actually is brain fog? Why does it happen? Is it another part of the brain? What part are we doing here? And how can we help combat it?
So brain fog, in a way, is, the brain with all its different parts is a learning machine. So it's looking to work, to adapt, the process to adapt to this new reality. And I think in the first months of loss, it's like 98% of the machine, the cogs, are working, dealing with this new reality. You have very little left over for anything else. That's why people go to Sainsbury's and they've left their wallet behind. They go to Sainsbury's, they leave the shopping behind. They go downstairs to get something. I mean, I do this without grieving. But I mean that we become very forgetful, but also it becomes very frightening because your brain is working unconsciously. I mean, like most of your brain works unconsciously. It's all of these processes aren't necessarily, it doesn't say to us, cha-chung, 70% adapted, cha-chung. So it's not like uploading, something on your WeTransfer, but that is what it's doing. So the machine is moving all of the time. And I think the thing that really helps is recognizing that you are going to forget things, have poor concentration. It's like a layer of skin is missing. You're going to react much more unpredictably, stronger, so that that sort of sense of grief feels like fear. So your body is more on alert, and that's part of the fog, because when you're on alert in that kind of protection system under threat, you don't have the capacity to use the hippocampus to kind of access deep memories, wisdom, understanding. So the thing that really helps you is slowing down and doing behaviors, action behaviors that actually bring you back into a sense of safety in yourself, in your body, in your mind. And, I often say to people, you've heard me say many times, take exercise, running, talking, walking and talking, doing a combination, I think, of exercise, breathing, journaling, and then connection. And some people need to process alone and then get connection. And some people need to process in relationship and co-regulate. But the thing that helps you kind of breathe and access the memories, because people are so frightened they're going to go, but they're there, is not to panic and go, oh, I've got to find it, I've got to retrieve. Is to slow down, breathe, don't force it. It's like when you stop trying to remember the thing, it comes back.
Like my dog walk, that's what it was. I was totally relaxed on this beautiful countryside walk, and it boom, like just plopped right into my head. And it's really you talking there about how just when we are high alert, and you think about when on a day-to-day if you're a bit frazzled of, I need to do this, need to do that.
You don't remember anything. You forget your phone, everything.
Exactly. And so, but I found that what you're saying there really interesting, of the times when I thought I wasn't on high alert and in like survival mode, and why I was still having brain fog. I actually was still on survival mode. I might not have been potentially externally showing that like I'm still on alert because I'm just really panicking that all my loved ones are going to die now after my mum, and just awful. That the memories weren't coming in because I'm on survival mode.
You're in survival mode. And the thing about thinking that other people are going to die is that our belief system is informed by our experience. And until your mum died, you had sort of blissful ignorance, kind of thing. You knew people died, but this sort of died out there. It wasn't really to do with me.
Right.
And now you knew from your experience. and because your explicit memory had informed your implicit memory, that people that you love can die. And once you know people you love can die suddenly, out of the blue, unpredictably, you can't not know that.
Yeah.
And then that informs all of your relationships. So most people, when they're grieving, particularly if it's been a sudden death, but I think also even if it's been an expected death, you know, when someone is late, it's like, oh my God, they've been run over.
Always.
They've had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're in the business like I am, you know, 90% of my attention is used up with sudden and unpredictable death of people who are young, out of order. So in my own life, when my children or grandchildren have a headache, I always think it's a brain tumor. I mean, it's just where I go.
It's so funny, isn't it, sometimes to like share that with people who maybe have not been like through work in the fields that we do, or experienced the losses that we have, of when you say out loud of, oh, your friend who's running 5 minutes late for coffee, why does my brain immediately go to, she's died? And whereas another person might go, she's stuck in traffic, it's okay. And it is,
or she forgot, she overslept,
she doesn't like me, she doesn't be my friend anymore, I don't want coffee. She stood me up.
That's not going to happen to you, Emma.
No, you wouldn't stand me up, would you? No. To move on to our last point, and then we're going to open up to Q&A, because I'm reading slightly through the chat here, and thank you to everybody who is sharing your stories, your experience with us. We can't wait to get to your Q&A. And so the last question I have for you, Julia, is, you know, throughout your career, your fantastic career, what are some ways that your clients, I know we've touched on it a little bit here, but anything specific individually of a client or anybody you know, memorializing their loved one, both in the, I guess, like immediacy of death and those years after, what would you recommend? It's almost like a starter kit to like getting to, we spoke about exercise and just slowing down and then seeing what happens. But is there anything else you've seen or heard that is a really beautiful way to do so?
I mean, I think when you one of the biggest difficulties of grief is that some people think when the funeral is done, it's kind of over, but actually it's just the beginning. And it's the beginning of your new life without this person that you love. But also their absence is the big presence in your life, and it's invisible. And so I think one of the very concrete things about memorializing and using rituals is that you make overt and physical what is invisible. And so it's an actual touchstone. So it could be that you do a photograph album. It could be that you make a sculpture. It could be that you kind of use stones and put them in a shape and change the shape, that you have a conversation with it. Some people start charities. Some people write poems, letters, books. But it's what people are really doing is making concrete and kind of holding in time, holding something that they have agency and control over and can shape into their own relationship with this person that is no longer physically present. And people do it, you know, we're doing a session at 11 o'clock with Jane Harris. She's made films and videos and now a book with other people, and people have painted, they've made amazing patchworks. And so that's one way of memorializing. You know, historically, we have great big statues of leaders and things like that. And we have days that we, you know, so I think the anniversary is in some ways a memorializing, and what people do on those days can be very significant. You know, I've had many clients who, if it's a child that dies, they want the child to be remembered with joy. So they may kind of want to have like a big picnic with lots of people and play games. And for other people, that would be unthinkable. Seeing other people's children alive and laughing and giggling would be unbearable. So again, it is so unique and individual. But I think what's instinctively kind of recognizing that we need to externalize this internal process, and that we need to have something kind of physical, I think, is the important bit of memorializing.
Yeah, tangible. And it's even when thinking about just grief as it is, I found in my very early years, the best way to almost become acquainted with just my grief was to almost imagine it as a thing, like a being. And some days it was friend and some days it was foe. And sometimes it's still
different hues. Yeah.
yeah.
And some,
And so
but also people feel guilty if they don't have it, like they feel, you know, that awful guilt and shame that I've forgotten, or I'm going to forget them, and that feeling that they're up, you know, somewhere outside of you, in wherever your belief system is, and that they feel abandoned by you. And so the thing that I often talk about with the memory is having them front of mind and back of mind. So their front of mind is when you may be memorializing or talking to a friend or doing something. And then in that dual process of, you know, loss orientation, well, that's what you're doing, but in restoration orientation, when you're getting on with life, you can kind of consciously go, okay, I'm going to leave you now just for a bit. I know I can get you back, put you in my heart. Often people think about it as their heart. And get on with their day, have some fun, you know, young like you, go dancing, go to a concert, have fun with your boyfriend. But if you, and that can help you from the kind of guilt of like sense of abandonment, because that relationship is continuing.
Yeah, fantastic, brilliant. Right, that's all of our talk, but we're now going to go into Q&A. I can see our little Q&A box going wild, and I've just got our Google Doc here. It's just opened it up. Thank you to everybody talking in the comments. I know there's.
And thank you for talking to each other.
Really,
I love
really
connecting with each other.
Really lovely, supporting one another, and this is what, you know, this festivals and all of us doing our work is. It's about connecting other people and facilitating and just being that vessel so you can all find each other. I know wonderful friendships that have come out of meeting in the Good Grief Festival comments, which is beautiful. Okay, so questions. Question from Rosie. This was early. I actually wanted to ask you about this, but it slipped my mind. What does Julia mean when she says doing the work? What do you mean by that?
So, you know, my book was called Grief Works, and that is doing the work of grief, is allowing, how we healing grief is by allowing ourselves to feel the pain and let it come through. You know, feelings, emotions are transmitters of information. So from that kind of psychological brain perspective, when you have that of pain, it's telling the explicit memory of is telling your implicit memory, my dad or my mom has died, my partner has died. And so allowing it to come through and incrementally in that moment, adjusting a little bit more to this new reality. And the kind of theory of it, I've talked on Good Grief before, is this dual process of the loss orientation, where we allow ourselves to feel the pain, and restoration orientation, where we give ourselves a break from the pain. And it's the movement, the oscillation between the two is the work of grief. To do the pain of the loss, the allowing the information to come through our whole body, and it's like waves and it cascades through us, and it can be for great lengths of time that you think you're never going to survive, or it can be very momentary. You do need the love and support of others. It is very, very hard, almost unbearable to do that alone. So you may need to feel the pain on your own because it's so kind of focused internally. But afterwards, you need to get support of others. And then that steadies your ship, as it were, steadies your system. And so you can feel calm again. And so it's this big up and down, but you need to allow the up and then do things that mean you feel safe in your body again. I hope that answers it.
That does. That really resonates with me, of kind of doing that internal work first. I think and the internal work for me was about 3 years before almost I combusted and was like, no, I need to share. And doing it because I had to figure it out internally before I could find the language to say externally what I was feeling. Thank you for that. Next question is from Naomi. What if you feel that your now dead partner was your memory, because they could always remember much more and in more detail than you? So recalling memories just doesn't come easily. That's yeah. That would be me. That would be my partner. Because I hoard all the memories. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think one of the kind of key aspects of grief is how we can turn the pain against ourselves and self-attack. And it can be like, I'm the idiot that doesn't have the memories, or there's something wrong with me, I'm defective in some way. And I think the thing that really supports you is to be self-compassionate and to be kind to yourself and not beat yourself up for who you find yourself to be. It's very hard, but it is this awful kind of complexity of grief that often we are hardest on ourselves, that somehow we feel that we're failing rather than finding a way of expressing our grief externally. And so, you know, there isn't a good or a right or a perfect way of grieving. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's unique, it's individual, and it's universal. So if you find that your kind of access to your memories isn't kind of your first place to go, then do something for you that works for who you are, so that you can access the relationship for yourself. So it may be making something, it may be talking to someone. There really isn't the right way. Memories aren't the only way.
Yeah, very true, very true. Obviously, our cue box is going wild, Julia.
Okay.
Being authentic in your grief. Oh, what's the next one? From Jane Harris, from When Words Are Not Enough.
Later, yeah.
Jane Harris, Talking Later, buy the book. Am, I love how you honour your mum's memory with humour and lived experience. What has helped you most in your grieving to become so open and authentic? My mother was an unfiltered woman, so I'm an unfiltered woman too, probably. No, that's not the.
But I think part of
it is, yes.
So a part is letting yourself grow the aspects of her that were already part of you through your genetic coding, but also from, you learn most from what you observe by, you know, what your mum modeled for you.
Yeah.
And I guess a way of honoring her is being quite like her.
Yeah, and kind of even subconsciously and consciously, my brother, he's like, yeah, the older you're getting, the more you are like mum, and just even the mannerisms, and it's funny. But even more so, what helped me become so open and quite, I guess, comfortable with talking about it was what you were just talking about there, kind of doing the inner work. And I can't say that inner work was a conscious thing for me. It's because I just was quite scared and I didn't know how to articulate what was going on. And then eventually, as you said, you kind of have to go outwards and to kind of deal with everything you've just worked inwards and go, guys, I've been thinking about some heavy stuff here. And that's when I did Grief Gang, and not to go and say start an account and a podcast, but to find people where you can share those kind of thoughts that are in your head and in your heart, where you think, God, if I say that out loud, they might think I've got two heads and like I'm an alien. People who will just go, yeah, I've been there, I am here with you, I can meet you where you're at, and we're in the same boat together, in different storms, but we're in the same little dinky kind of boats. So for me, it was really finding people, because hearing through their stories helped me understand mine. Even though if we were worlds apart and losses apart, it helped me understand my loss. Absolutely.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
In recognizing that your mum's death has shaped you to the extent it has, and now it has become your professional life, is there a boundary or a kind of negotiation that you do where you feel you're in the present, living your life, making and building your life, you know, knowing that your mum is influencing you? Or does it sometimes feel like all I deal now is grief, and so mum's death is just, all I am is Grief Gang?
Yeah.
And so I'm not alive and living and doing stuff, like it's over influenced me.
Yes, there was a time. Do you know what? I'll be totally honest. I think only up until about this year did I actually kind of park the latter and go, I'm 25. I've got my whole life to live, and I spend a lot of time. I'm 25. I've got a lot of life to live, and I talk a lot about death and dying, and that the two can exist, but in what balance and kind of. I love what I do, and I love talking. Not love talking about
You
death.
like relationship.
I love people. I love how we tick. I love how we cope. I'm fascinated by the brain, all these little parts of how we tick. But yeah, honoring, though that's such a huge part of my life, is essentially, yes, like honoring my mum. This all started to honor my mum, but then straddling the line of when it did become probably quite unhealthy. And that is why the whole, turning pain into purpose, I really struggle with that, because I think it's really quite loaded. But then actually, I look back and I realize that's what I did. I'm so hypocritical. I can't say don't do that. I essentially turned my pain into a purpose. But there's a real, I think sometimes after somebody dies, as a form of memorializing, actually, people want to do something. They think this pain can't be for nothing. It can't, this loss cannot be for nothing. It cannot be.
Making meaning is a big part of
making meaning and making sense of, okay, well, they must, like, oh, gosh, there was many times where before, when I probably started grief again, where I thought, well, this is maybe my path, like maybe my mum dying, it was a reason so that I could help other people. And I was like, no, I mean, mum just died of a heart attack and it was absolutely tragic.
Two things can be true.
Exactly, and dependent on what day, and it is, and I float between the two, but yeah, I've definitely managed to find my balance and leaning more into the being here and now, because I know that sometimes being here and now could be stripped from you like that. My mum was gone in 24 hours, so I love my community, I love the work that I do, but to live, to really live and to take in the moment. So thank you for that question. That's made me reflect on my last year of how I've been. The pressure to get over grief. A question from Jay. I am a therapist, so many of my therapy clients are badly damaged by the pressure they feel to get over their grief. How might you deal with that pressure and help clients, friends and family accept that everyone grieves differently and in their own way?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of ignorance about the process of grieving, and that it's an accommodation, that it changes you internally and you adapt and grow through it. You don't kind of stop and get over it. And so I think, unfortunately, for people who are grieving, sometimes they need to educate their friends, which is the last thing they want to be doing, because they're the ones that want to access the support. But I think there is still this very linear, simplistic, mechanical view of grief that comes from Kubler-Ross, that, you know, you do these steps and then you get to acceptance and then you're done and you just take the new road and march forward. But if anyone really thinks about themselves with any kind of insight, you kind of know that we're not machines, and that our experiences always inform and shape us and develop us. And that we are born adaptive, we are wired to be adaptive, and that when we let those experiences shape us and the pain grow through us, that is how we grow. And some people talk about it as post-traumatic grief, that you could, I mean, it's post-traumatic growth, so that the level of the loss and the trauma is never diminished, but it changes you, and the way that it changes you, when you look back on it, your perception of yourself, the world, how you are in the world, is experienced like growth.
Yeah.
But it's an accommodation. It is never getting over. It's, you know, a lot of people talk about their new normal.
Yeah, and the moving forward and not on. It's all these, you know, these small little words. I'm moving on. I'd be like, it's forward, please, not on.
But also that, like, you know, I think there's this view about life, is that this life is this trajectory that is just this upward path that gets you to a better place. And nobody's life is like that. Life is, you know, up and down, up and down.
Yeah. God, don't we know? Last question, then we will close. Thank you, everybody who's been sharing. It's been absolutely wonderful, and seeing the comment section going.
Lovely seeing you all support each other. I want to talk to all of you.
I know, but also like a little hangout after another time. From Hiba, is going to the cemetery consistently a healthy way to continue a bond, even 1 year after a death? What about feeling guilty when we don't visit? Oh, this really resonates. Oof.
So, I mean, I think this idea of developing rituals that imbue you with the relationship with the person that died, and that if going to the grave is that for you, that is meaningful. And it's a very good externalizing of allowing yourself to kind of go somewhere, be somewhere, and remember. And also be forgiving and self-compassionate. The days that you don't go, those are the days you don't go. It doesn't mean you don't love the person that's died. It doesn't mean that you don't honor them. It doesn't mean that you don't miss them. It's just that today you don't give it extra meaning that it doesn't have. They kind of shape your habits and ways of remembering to work for the person you are, rather than having this cookie cutout that I should be and must be and do it perfectly. And I think if we have a predisposition to kind of want to be perfect, we want to shape Marie Kondo our grief to be perfect too, and you're never going to do that. It's a messy, chaotic, upside down business.
Joy? Does it bring you joy? You know. I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really, and this question from him really resonated with me, because I feel like this was me in the first year too. Of our mum is buried about 3 hours away from us in her hometown by the seaside, so going to see her was quite an event. And we would go, you know, Christmas, birthday, Easter, everything you go would go to the grave, and it was quite the trip. And then as years went by, I actually started realizing I didn't feel that good when I went to the grave. I came back, it was, I felt like the heavy, and I would cry that 3-hour journey home, and my head would be throbbing. It still isn't enjoyable for me, but because I wanted to fit into that cutout of, I am the perfect daughter who will honour her mum's life by visiting her grave every bloody month of the year, even if it kills me inside. And eventually something just changed over time, and I said, I can actually still honour my mum
do it my way.
In my town, where I don't have to go for 3 hours, and actually where it doesn't agonize me as well. And so for this person, I can't say like when that happened, but it definitely, all that we've discussed today about tapping into memory and touchstones kind of helped me relieve that guilt of, because I felt so guilty for not going.
To pause there, but and also to say it's such a shame that some of the comments in the chat have not been addressed. I am so sorry.
Oh,
I really wish we could have addressed all of your comments. They're all so meaningful and important. And it's a horrible thing when you actually do write something, you dare to write it, and then it isn't honoured or spoken. So I am really sorry. And
we'll hopefully do another one.
You can find me on Instagram, maybe message.
I'll close now. So what I would recommend for everybody now, if you would like to, the chat is going to stay open for a couple of minutes after. So if anybody has shared resources or accounts, you know, details, you can quickly take those down, put them in your phone, write them down.
And you can find me and Amber on Instagram.
So we're going to close. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. And again, our sincere apologies for not getting to questions. You can find me on Instagram at the Grief Gang Podcast, and you can listen to the podcast on any major podcast platforms. And you can find Julia
on Julia Samuel MBE, and also my podcast Therapy Works.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great weekend.